News leader. And on this primary election day, we begin here at 6 with the influence of Governor Greg Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton. Tonight, both men will be watching several races very closely, including some right here in East Texas. Tonight, we take a look at what has been, in many cases, a very expensive and at times ugly fight to the finish.
We voted 4 times in about 3 minutes to say, no, Governor, we don't want vouchers.
Governor Greg Abbott's fight to unseat State Rep Travis Clardy started in November when the Nacogdoches attorney and 21 other Republicans voted against a school voucher-like plan prioritized by the governor, a stance Clardy maintains.
My motivation is not to do with the bidding of some new friends, from Pennsylvania or Michigan or California, a bunch of billionaires who owe their money. I really don't think that they have the best interest of the school children of East Texas in their heart.
And just as the governor did in similar races, he backed Clardy's opponent, Joanne Schaffner, and even traveled to Clardy's district 3 times to stump for Schaffner.
She and I will ensure we keep Texas the best state in the greatest country in the history of the world.
The governor did the same for other East Texas lawmakers who voted in favor of his school choice legislation, like State Rep Cole Hefner of Mount Pleasant and Cody Harris of Palestine.
The one thing that I heard is you can't support both public education and education savings accounts. And I just flatly reject that argument.
It doesn't serve the overall good of the children of HD7.
And while State Rep Jay Dean of Longview voted the same way Clardy did, he was spared from the governor's revenge tour, with Abbott endorsing no one in the race for House District 7.
I think when the governor takes time to endorse someone, I think it means something. I do think in this case, I don't think it means as much because he's endorsing an issue. He's not specifically endorsing a candidate.
Now, Attorney General Ken Paxton's involvement in East Texas races has been rather insignificant when you compare it to the governor. The AG endorsed reps who voted against his impeachment last year, including State Rep Travis Clardy of Nacogdoches, meaning he and the governor have dueling endorsements in that particular race.